Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Hundreds of people attended a meeting last night in Richmond to talk about what impact a BC Supreme Court decision regarding land title might have on personal property rights. We'll talk to Richmond Mayor Malcolm Brodie about what he heard, and we're asking what's needed to address the uncertainty following this court decision. After 12:30, a motion at Vancouver City Council called for the voting age to be lowered to 16. That has just been rejected, but we'll ask you what you think of the idea. That's after 12:30. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. The decision around the Cowichan land title came to a boiling point at last night's Richmond information session. Property owners and stakeholders packed the Sheraton Hotel to seek answers about property rights and the potential impact on residents who own land within the area the courts granted Aboriginal title to. Richmond Mayor Malcolm Brodie was in the hot seat as he heard from residents reeling from the decision's short notice and their concerns over possible declines in property values. We spoke to some residents outside the event.
It already takes more than one lifetime almost for a young family to buy property. I talked to a lot of parents. I'm with the District Parents Association. It's an incredible amount of time and energy in this city to be able to afford property. And it seems like the future that people are building is one where the next generation, all you'll get to be able to buy is leasehold property.
The two titles can't coexist at the same time. For you to have the rights to your land, to be able to build on it or to sell it or to mortgage it or to do anything you want on it, you need to be the one to have title to it. If somebody else also has title to it, it creates confusion and uncertainty. The banks have determined that this is an issue.
I have two sons that bought a condo in the Waterstone Pier complex, which is within the claim area. And this news came out, and the misinformation was flying left, right, and center. I mean, our MLA got the whole story wrong. He says there's no worries about you losing your property. And then the Mayor Brodie came out and says he actually took the time to print off letters and submit them to the property owners. So obviously there's a lot of misinformation going on.
Now, the Cowichan tribes did not claim title over private land, but the court said the Crown's granting of private property rights infringes on Cowichan Aboriginal title. It says the issue of land rights and title need to be resolved through negotiation, litigation, or purchase. And the court said otherwise properties would remain under Cowichan title. And while the Cowichan tribes have said they are not interested in properties held by private landowners, the decision has set off a lot of uncertainty. We're asking you, what do you think is needed to address the uncertainty around property rights? And what does the BC government need to do? You can call us now. Just hit pound 690 on your cell phone or dial 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or you can hit pound 690 on your cell phone again. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca or leave a comment on our TikTok Live. Joining me first is Richmond Mayor Malcolm Brodie. Good afternoon. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, good afternoon.
We heard just how tense things got last night. What was your sense of what you heard from residents?
We heard the many different concerns of residents, and I think what they have expressed is fully justified. We wanted to have an information meeting to make sure that people specifically in the area that's affected have full knowledge of the situation and to the best that we can tell them where the situation is going from here. So we heard their concerns about the fact that they didn't know about this situation, and of course having the meeting was to address that particular problem, but they felt that they should have been notified earlier. There was a great deal of concern about just what does it mean, everything from do we pay taxes to some other party to I'm not going to be able to sell my property or get insurance and have it mortgaged. So we heard a great number of concerns. And in the wider sense, one of the big purposes of the meeting was to get the word out to the wider community that we have a decision of the court that in my mind and in the city's mind potentially undermines the entire land title system that we have in the province, and we've had it for over a century. It's a devastating decision with really draconian consequences, potentially, and it needs to be resolved.
The Cowichan tribes have differentiated between privately held, private landowners versus city-owned land or government-owned land or corporate land. And the Cowichan Nation issued a statement this week calling your public statements and that of other politicians to be, quote, at best misleading and at worst deliberately inflammatory. And they say the court case has not and does not challenge the effectiveness or validity of any title held by individual private landowners. The ruling does not erase private property. That's not enough for you?
I can't say how much I disagree with that for a number of reasons, and I say, listen, if you're not looking to affect landowners, why are you appealing to go from 800 acres to 1,800 acres that are directly affected? I mean, that's the first thing. Secondly, the very nature of the situation is that you now have the concept of Aboriginal title, you have the concept of fee simple title, and each of those gives the holder the right of possession and exclusive use of that property and tells you who owns it. So you have two systems that work side by side that are basically incompatible, and we have to deal with it.
Do you see room for negotiation? Is that the next step then, given that this is now being staved off or held off for 18 months?
Well, only a small part of the judgment is being held off for 18 months. The next thing that's going to happen is there's going to be an application for a stay of the effect of the judgment while the appeals are underway. I think ultimately there needs to be negotiation between the province, the feds, and the Cowichan, and there will be some kind of a financial package, is my guess. But secondly, because of the historic nature of the decision made by the Supreme Court of British Columbia, which I think is absolutely wrong, we also have to go through with the appeal to overturn that decision, which in a great percentage of the population thinks the decision was made in error.
How do you think we should move forward with reconciliation? Do you worry that this court decision or politicians' handling of the case is dividing Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities?
Reconciliation was always to be over public property owned by the federal and provincial governments. It was never to be over fee simple private land holdings. And by taking this aggressive approach and affecting the titles of private landowners to fee simple titles, the results are historic.
And what would be the impact of this on city-owned lands?
Well, the city was really the only party that lost some land because we got two parcels along the river as a result of tax sales, almost 100 years ago or so. The court said that we're not a purchaser for value, and it goes to the Cowichan. So very simply, we are directly affected by the judgment. And again, that's under appeal, and I can assure you that we're going to carry through on it.
Mayor Brodie, thank you very much for your time.
Anytime. Thank you.
That's Richmond Mayor Malcolm Brodie, and we are taking your calls, asking you what's needed to address the uncertainty around the property rights question as a result of this decision at the BC Supreme Court level, and what do you want the BC government to do? You can call us now. Just hit pound 690 on your cell phone or dial 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. We'll be joined by our CBC Provincial Affairs reporter, Katie DeRosa, in just a moment. Let's take some calls right now, though. Justin is on the line in Cowichan. Hi, Justin.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. Thanks very much. And what do you think is needed to address the uncertainty following this court decision?
I think we're all equals. Like these treaties were signed so there was no ethnic cleansing back then. Everything should have been abolished after World War II as well. I mean, everybody was fighting for the land, and I don't believe there should be any treaty rights like that. I mean, it's just too much. And then where are we paying our land taxes to if this happens, right? Like, why are we even paying land taxes if they're going to come back 100 years later and say, oh, this is our land now? Where's the stop to it? Yeah, I mean, why are we paying taxes?
Justin, thank you very much for your call from Cowichan. Lanny is on the line now in Kitimat. Hi, Lanny. What's needed to address the uncertainty?
Well, I think what would be really helpful is for people in BC, like the gentleman who just called in, to just, back down on sort of the fear and the reaction and always wondering what's next, and instead just take some time to understand the history of this province. The vast majority of British Columbia is unceded lands. We know that. If people want to take the time to look at some of the earlier court decisions, particularly, Delgamuukw, where they can learn that people like the Gitxsan and the Wet'suwet'en and virtually every Indigenous nation in this province had very complex pre-existing governance systems. We showed up, we brought our diseases that wiped out 95% of their population, and we essentially just moved in. This wasn't a case of conquering by war. This wasn't a case of making a treaty. This was a case of kicking people while they were down. Where I live in Kitimat, there's many stories of people out towards the Bulkley Valley, Indigenous people who had their homes burned, not just once but twice, like picking up and moving off their land when the missionaries came in, and then the men with guns came in next. And my experience living my whole life basically in a community with a high Indigenous population is that these people are incredibly generous and humble, and as the Cowichan are saying, they're not looking to go after the land. They're looking to build a relationship between nations. And a documentary that I think every Canadian should see. Jody Wilson-Raybouldt's father is one of the main characters in this documentary, and it's called Dancing Around the Table. It was recommended to me by a Heisler friend recently, and it's from the 1980s constitutional discussions, where you see all of these intelligent, articulate Indigenous leaders pleading with our premiers and our prime minister of the time to just say, let's talk, let's come together and find a way to live on these lands together. And instead, as was highlighted in this documentary, what's continued to happen for the last 50 years, what's been going on since settlers came here, is that we continue to only know power politics, control. It doesn't seem that we have the maturity and the capacity to sit down and deal with the complexity that we need to deal with. So our courts consistently uphold the pre-existing rights of self-governance and self-determination of the people whose lands we're occupying. And then the people we elect, instead of listening to the guidance of the court, taking the time to do the hard work, to listen to where they're coming from, to have it not be about ego and power, instead of doing that, we just keep demanding that we go in and rape and pillage the land for because we want the trees and we want the minerals, and that improvements are being made, but we keep, again, watch the documentary. It's Dancing Around the Table. We keep coming back to power and control instead of building the relationship. So, in short, truth comes before reconciliation. So people learn the truth of the history of this land, learn your complicity in continuing this process of colonization, and let's instead sit and work this out and build a nation together. All the Indigenous people I've met want to do that, and we're the ones that need to look in the mirror and figure out how to just handle a little bit of complexity, uncertainty, and not be in such a rush and be so fear and ego-based.
Lanny, thank you for the call as well from Kitimat. Again, taking your calls. What's needed to address the uncertainty around the Cowichan Land Tribe's land title ruling? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Joining me now for more on this, on the provincial political impact, is CBC's provincial affairs reporter, Katie DeRosa. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Michelle.
What do you make of the interest? We saw that the Attorney General Nikki Sharma was at the meeting, as well as the Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, Spencer Chandra Herbert, as well as BC Conservative Party leader John Rustad, all were there. So what do you make of the interest that this is garnering among BC politicians?
Well, this has definitely caught the interest of politicians and homeowners after Mayor Malcolm Brodie wrote the letter saying that this could compromise the validity of their ownership. And just today, it's come to light that there is a fake letter going around from the city of North Vancouver that says that the First Nations, the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations could be, that those lands are on those the homeowners' lands are on those properties and that could be Aboriginal title, but that is a fake letter. So that's just to give you some of the indication of the tempers that are flaring. That's why several hundred residents packed into the ballroom last night. They were given about 3 minutes each to speak. And Mayor Brodie started by saying that residents, people shouldn't clap. It would be conducted like a city hall meeting. But it was really hard to enforce because tempers were so high. Mayor Brodie had to stop the meeting several times. There were shouting matches. So this just shows you how heated things have become.
And you talk about how heated it was. The Mayor, Malcolm Brodie, went through some of the concerns that the Richmond homeowners did bring forward. I mentioned the BC Conservative leader, John Rustad, was there as well last night. He's been critical of the decision. He calls it the thin edge of the wedge. And let's just listen to what he had to say.
People need to be aware of what this means and how this will impact people right across this province and, quite frankly, I suspect across this country.
So, like, to be precise, are you scared that people are going to lose their home? Is that what you're concerned about?
I don't think it will get to that stage. At least I'm hopeful that that won't get to that stage. But what I'm worried about is, what are your rights as a private property owner? You don't know what those rights are. And some First Nations and some people are arguing that those private properties should never have been sold. It was illegal to do that, which would mean you would lose your private property and your rights and your investment entirely.
So Rustad was at a rally before the meeting that was attended by dozens of people, including members of Richmond's Chinese community, who one of whom told us that they're worried that this has echoes of communist China, where the government could take your land. And so Rustad was making a speech to some of those people at the rally. But what he is asking the BC government to do is to have a reference question directly to the Supreme Court of Canada, and therefore expediting the court case, basically leapfrogging the Court of Appeal so that residents can have a peace of mind earlier.
We've been taking calls on this as well. Let me just go back to the phone lines here. Byron is calling from Kamloops, and you're a member of the Cowichan tribes, Byron.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for taking my call. Yeah, I'm a member of Cowichan tribes. I don't speak for Cowichan tribes. I'm a realtor. And I'm also the president and founder of the Indigenous Real Estate Association of Canada. So what concerns me most about this, how the decision is being portrayed in the media, is the misinformation, miscommunications, and misunderstandings that are sort of taking place around the reality of the decision itself and the protection of the rights holders that are on the land now. The decision clearly states that the governments involved, the plaintiffs, needed to work in the honor of the Crown to come to terms around the matter, right? So, it wasn't a secret that this trial was going on. It went on, and why did it happen in the first place is because, the governments refused to come to the treaty table. Cowichan is the Cowichan Treaty Group is involved in negotiations for decades around a treaty for Cowichan tribes. And they refused to entertain the reality that we had a permanent village site with 108 longhouses on this location. So the reason that it got to court in the first place is, because it wouldn't be discussed.
It's interesting that you're a realtor, Byron. What are your thoughts on the comments we heard from Mayor Brodie there about the questions around fee simple title?
I would point, so fee simple title, if the fee simple title is defective, there are remedies for people that come across a title. that has been fraudulently conveyed. But this very historical component to this that goes back, over 100 years with Thomas Moody. So, it's a matter that has to be discussed and negotiated between the plaintiffs, the government, the Port Authority, the City of Richmond, the federal and provincial governments all need to come to the table and work out how this is going to unfold. You see what happened with the Haida Gwaii decision. No private property interests were directly affected. The marketability of them is going to be, at question. What's going to happen? Yes, that does create some uncertainty. But, in terms of some previous caller said, well, the banks are calling it a problem. Well, no, because nothing has changed in those titles as it sits right now. It's an open question that has to be resolved.
Byron, really appreciate hearing from you. Thank you for the call. Byron calling from Kamloops, who is a member of the Cowichan tribes, also a realtor and president and founder of the Indigenous Real Estate Association of Canada. It is just about 12:27 for our TV audience. We're going to pause for a 2-minute break. We will see you here back on the show in a couple of minutes from now. Right now, let's take one more caller before I go back to Katie DeRosa. And Suki is joining us from Vancouver. Hi, Suki. Welcome. What are your thoughts on the uncertainty around this?
Yes. Hi, Michelle. So just quick context. I am a former federal candidate in the last election, so I have been involved in politics. And what really concerns me and what makes my blood boil, in all honesty, is the fake letters, the misleading statements, and the inflammatory statements. This is all just for gaining political points, and it just removes trust and any kind of good faith in any future negotiations. And that's what really makes my blood boil, because we're not looking towards an actual solution. We're looking to just create so much chaos that it divides people, and I don't like that. So what I propose is that all the stakeholders need to get together, need to negotiate in confidence, with trust and good faith, deliver an outcome that promotes reconciliation that we do need, that we desperately need here in Canada, but also protects the rights of private landowners. And I believe that if we can do things properly to get all of this noise and all of this stuff that a lot of politicians are doing right now, but if we can do things right, then this would be a great example for every other future negotiation that will possibly happen here in Canada. And in the meanwhile, I would encourage the provincial and federal governments to ensure that banks continue to ensure that they provide mortgages to private landowners.
Okay. Suki, sorry to jump in. Thank you very much for your call. That's Suki in Vancouver. Let me go back to CBC Provincial Affairs reporter Katie DeRosa. And last night as well, BC Cabinet Minister and Minister of Reconciliation and for Indigenous Relations, Spencer Chandra Herbert, was at the meeting. Let's just take a listen to a bit of what he had to say.
The position that we ran with was the same position they put forward when they were in government, and that's because that was the strongest legal position for BC to mount, and we continue to believe it's the strongest case. So our position, of course, is we're open to hearing from Cowichan, we're open to working with them, but the principle is still the same. Fee simple, private property interests are protected in BC, and we will make sure of that.
And so, Katie, he spoke there. We've just heard some comments about this need for negotiation. The Attorney General, Nikki Sharma, was also there. And so what did we hear from her about the next steps here?
Well, it's interesting because Minister Sharma had asked to speak at the meeting and was told by the mayor's office that she was just to have a listening role. But then as the meeting went on, and it was clearly quite heated, a lot of it directed at Mayor Brodie in the City of Richmond, Sharma was invited to speak. So she assured residents that the province is appealing and that they're asking for a stay of proceedings until that appeal can be heard. But there was a lot of concerns at the meeting from Richmond residents about why they weren't informed. That was directed both at the City of Richmond and at the province. And Sharma basically said that the lower court at the time, several years ago, assured the province that that no decision would impact private property owners. So that was the information they're going on, and clearly that perhaps that's not the case.
Katie, thank you very much for joining us for this. Obviously, we will watch to see what happens next. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Michelle.
Katie DeRosa, CBC's provincial affairs reporter. After our news update, I will go to Pedro in Chilliwack, and thanks very much for your patience and waiting to comment, Pedro. All right, now it is 12:31. You're with BC Today, and following that discussion, we'll take your calls on this idea of lowering the voting age to 16 years old. There was a motion from Green Party Councillor Pete Fry this morning at Vancouver City Council. That has been turned down, but we'll take your calls on that idea and what difference would that make? How would it make politics different to have the voting age lowered to 16? Your calls on that coming up in a few minutes as well. Right now, it is time for a CBC News update, and here's Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. A 52-year-old man has been arrested in Campbell River in connection with a number of violent sexual assaults in southwestern Ontario almost 30 years ago. Between March and August of 1997, 4 young women reported to police they had been assaulted. Last year, DNA evidence linked all 4 cases to the same person, and this past weekend, the RCMP on Vancouver Island arrested a suspect. Jason Davidson is now facing several charges, including sexual assault causing bodily harm, kidnapping, and forcible confinement. A union representing about 250 civic workers in the district of Squamish says a tentative agreement has been reached, but the picket lines aren't coming down just yet. QP Local 2269 says they will stay up until both sides have ratified the deal. And the Bank of Canada has cut its key interest rate by a quarter point to 2.25%. It's the second back-to-back cut. Bank Governor Tiff Macklem says policymakers feel this might be the right level to keep inflation close to the bank's 2% target. And now the forecast on the north coast, mainly cloudy with a high of 9, highs reaching +2 and clearing this afternoon in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, a chance of showers with a high of 8, highs up to 9 and mainly cloudy in the West Kootenay, a bit of sunshine in the East Kootenay. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, clearing late this afternoon with a high of 11, and a chance of showers in the Fraser Valley, a mix of sun and cloud in Metro Vancouver and Greater Victoria, with highs around 12. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Rob, thank you very much. I will let you know I have hopped onto the Blue Jays bandwagon.
That good for you. It's been exciting, right?
Yes, it's a commitment. It's a time commitment.
Yeah. Well, the last Game 3 was definitely a big commitment.
It sure was.
Yeah,
but I'm in it. I'm in it for the long haul. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. It's 12:33. You're with BC Today, and we have been taking your calls on this question of uncertainty following a BC Supreme Court ruling granting property rights in Richmond to the Cowichan tribes, to a section of land in Richmond. And it says the court says that the issue of land rights and title needs to be resolved through negotiation, litigation, or purchase. The court says otherwise properties would remain under Cowichan title. And while the Cowichan tribes have said they're not interested in properties held by private landowners, certainly a lot of uncertainty following that decision. And we talked to Richmond Mayor Malcolm Brodie earlier on. Let me just go to Pedro in Chilliwack. Hi, Pedro. Hi, Pedro, are you there? I think we have lost our connection. Hi, Pedro, are you there? Okay, that's okay. Pedro, thank you very much for holding on as long as you did. We have some emails. Mina writes, everybody starts breaking the rules as soon as, that is an email on a different topic. We are going to take your emails on this as well. Certainly, bctoday@cbc.ca is our address. What do you think is needed to address the uncertainty? And what do you think is needed from the BC government at this stage? 12:35 now. You're with BC Today. Well, Vancouver City Council has just shot down a motion to petition the province to support lowering the voting age to 16 in time for the upcoming municipal election next October 17th. Now, 3 councillors voted in favor, 5 councillors were in opposition, and 2 councillors and Mayor Ken Sim were absent. The motion was put forward by Green Party councillor Pete Fry, and it states at 16, individuals can work, pay taxes, drive, and in some cases be tried as adults. It also points to other jurisdictions where voter age is 16 for at least one level of government. Okay, it's been turned down today, but we're asking you about the idea. What do you think? Should the voting age be lowered to 16? And what do you think would be different in politics if 16-year-olds could vote? If you could vote as young as 16, what would be different? You can call us now. Just hit pound 690 on your cell phone or dial 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Our email again is bctoday@cbc.ca, and we're watching your comments on TikTok. If any students, high school students, are on their lunch break and you're watching us on TikTok, love to hear from you on this. We did request Councillor Pete Fry to join us, and he was unavailable to talk about his motion. But here to talk about why they would like to see the voting age lowered are 2 people who actually spoke in front of the committee today, Jerry Song and Jason Song. Now, they are brothers. They co-host a podcast called Twin Talk Politics and co-directors of Vote16 BC. Hello to you both.
Well, hello. It's an honor to be on the show.
Thank you very much. I'll note that you're twins as well. That's why it's called Twin Talk Politics, right?
Yes, we're twins, yeah, unfortunately.
I imagine you spend a lot of time together, including today. Jason, let me start with you. Okay, so what's your reaction to the council's decision today?
Yeah, it was really disheartening going inside the council meeting. I think Jerry and I and the entire rest of the Vote16 BC crew, we were extremely optimistic, and it was for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I think if you look at what's happening internationally, there's been so much support and a huge surge of support, especially after the United Kingdom actually extended their voting age 16 this summer in all levels of government. And especially in BC, where over the summer, the provincial legislature just had the special committee on democratic and electoral reform, where Vote16 was one of the major issues raised. So we thought that had a huge surge of momentum that carried into this council motion. And the second reason as to why we were extremely optimistic was actually, Vancouver City Council unanimously endorsed Vote16 BC all the way back in 2021. And in fact, many of the councillors who were sitting then in 2021 are still councillors today. So we were really expecting an optimistic and better result, but unfortunately, we did not get that. However, it was super invigorating to see how many people showed up. I think there was more than 10 different speakers from all different walks of life. Who are there to speak and give direct testimony. We had past city councillors. We had the leader of the Green Party provincially speaking there. It was really exciting to see. And even though the motion did not go through, I think throughout this entire week, or even the past 2 weeks, there's been so much talk online, all media on Vote16. So we definitely got to hear a lot more of what people had to say and think about Vote16. So overall, I think it was still a win.
Okay, so you're coming away optimistic regardless. But Jerry, I wonder, the voter turnout is historically lower among younger voters, and what did you hear today when it came to the opposition to this idea?
Yeah, I think, as you said, that's probably one of the major concerns that people have towards extending the voting age to 16. The common question is, if 18-year-olds are not actively voting right now, and not many of them vote, how will suddenly extending the voting age to 16 suddenly make a drastic difference? And that's a very valid question. And the answer lies in the first vote effect. And the first vote effect refers to the phenomenon where if you vote in your first ever election, you're far more likely to vote in every subsequent election. And here's how that plays out in the difference between 16 and 18-year-olds. Because when you're 16, you're still at home, you've probably grown up in that community your entire life. You have the safety net of your friends and family to have these difficult conversations about voting and the importance of voting, and you probably know all of the local issues. Now, contrast that when you're 18 years old. You're probably, if you're not working, you're probably away in college, maybe far, far away from your family. And when you're in a new place, you probably don't know the voting issues. You don't even know who may represent you, and you often lose safety net to talk about the importance of voting. So it's far less likely as an 18-year-old to vote compared to a 16-year-old. And critically, for 18-year-olds, if you don't vote in that first election, you're less likely to vote in your second election and every subsequent election following that.
Okay, let me go to some calls here. My guests are Jerry Song and Jason Song, who are twin brothers. They co-host a podcast called Twin Talk Politics, co-directors of Vote16 B.C. Again, the city of Vancouver has just turned down a motion that sought to go to the province to lower the voting age to 16 in time for the upcoming municipal election in about a year from now. Taking your calls, what do you think of the idea, and what do you think would be different if voting was lowered to 16? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. We did put out a call to local high schools just to let them know we were talking about this and try and encourage people to call in. So we do have Caden calling us from Tamanawis Secondary in Surrey. Hi, Caden. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi.
Yes, what are your thoughts on lowering the voting age to 16?
Look, as a 17-year-old, I'd love to have the opportunity, but I'm going to have to kind of say here that I don't think it'd be appropriate to extend that right to people my age. I honestly don't think there's enough education done on this topic for students to kind of understand how their votes are going to affect other people. And I think 16 and 17, these are the years where it's sort of that transition period where you're kind of getting your foot out the door, and you're kind of you have to sort of understand, where you have to be independent and how to get guidance at the same time. And I don't think this age is the right age for those people to kind of make adult decisions. And also, just to kind of mention some other studies here, there's been reports that literacy assessment rates are down more than 14 points compared to 2015 and 2016. And so that concerns me a little bit, because as a young voter, I would hope that people that are voting are able to have even a basic understanding about literacy and even things about politics and things like that. Right now, there just isn't enough education to kind of foster this new a rule if adopted. But I think there needs to be. Go ahead.
No, I'm just listening to you. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I also want to respond to the BC Teachers Federation has supported the idea, and I think it's a bit surprising to me, considering what teachers see on a daily basis. There's no doubt about it that literacy rates are on the decline in the province, and so, of course, with all the work that they do in mind, we all appreciate the work that teachers do. I think it's a bit surprising just to see that the people who are around children 24/7 and kind of teaching them are for this idea. Knowing my peers and being around students my age all the time, I hear typical talk, that politics is important and that their vote isn't really going to matter, and things of that nature. And I just don't think people are understanding the comprehension behind how a vote works and how it affects others. So just to end, I just strongly oppose the idea.
Caden, thank you very much for your perspective, an interesting perspective to hear from a 17-year-old. Jason, what are your thoughts on that he says there's just not enough literacy and civic literacy at that age?
For sure. Thank you, Caden, for that remark. I think that's definitely a common sentiment shared by a lot of people. So you're not alone there. I guess what I'll do is I'll briefly talk about the remarks of Caden, and I'll pass it off to Jerry to explicitly talk about the education piece there. But I think, as Caden pointed out, a lot of the opposition stems, in my opinion, from a place of inconsistent standards and the lack of mutual exclusivity. So, for instance, a lot of the critics say that 16-year-olds are too impressionable to disinformation or misinformation. Yeah, I want to clarify, so are adults. And some argue that 16-year-olds don't work, but neither do full adults. And they say we're not knowledgeable, but 51% of Canadians who are currently eligible to vote and in the voter base believe that Canadians directly elect the Prime Minister, and 1 in 6 adult Canadians would fail a basic literacy test. So if we're holding youth to a higher bar than adults, I think we have to be then prepared to ask ourselves, are we willing and prepared to make every single adult take a test to prove that they're informed and competent enough to vote? I don't think so, right? Because that's not how democracy works. And I don't think it shouldn't be any more different for young people. But now I'll pass it off to Jerry to talk about that education element and maturity element of that as well.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, for sure. Just just jumping off what Jason talked about, just on terms of maturity, I think this is a common sentiment explored by many, which is that, at 16, you haven't reached that maturity and therefore shouldn't wield a ballot that may decide the decision of a country. But actually, scientifically, it has been proven that 16-year-olds are equal to adults in terms of maturity. And you don't really need to believe Jason nor myself to believe science, because Dr. Steinberg, a world-leading expert in adolescence, found that by age 16, the maturity and judgment required to vote are already fully developed. And it's not only science. Our government already implicitly agrees that 16-year-olds are pretty competent, because at 16, if you can drive, if you can marry, if you pay taxes, be tried as an adult, and in many cases, vote in party leadership races at 14, we definitely think you can vote. And just talking about the second part of that on the lack of competency when voting, in past experiences such as Austria, such as Belgium and Germany, it has been found that 16 and 17 years old vote just as thoughtfully and just as independently, if not more so, than their older counterparts.
Let's take some more calls on this question of lowering the voting age to 16. A motion put forward today at Vancouver City Council by Green Councillor Pete Fry did fail, but he was hoping that the city would go to the province to be able to seeking support to lower the voting age to 16. So that's failed, but we're asking you about the idea. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Interesting, we just heard from a 17-year-old who said, no, I don't think it should be lowered, but we just heard the argument there from Jerry Song in terms of these other things you can do as 16-year-old, so why not also vote? And Cash is calling from Kamloops with a similar thought. Hi, Cash.
Hi, how are you?
I am very well. Thanks for calling in.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that I think that 16 and 17-year-olds should be allowed to vote. You can be charged with a crime at age 16 and 17. A lot of 17-year-olds and 16, 17-year-olds rely on public transit. They pay taxes, so why wouldn't they be allowed to vote? The critics that say that they shouldn't be allowed to vote, well then if that's the case, maybe they shouldn't be able to be charged with a crime. Maybe they don't have to pay taxes and things like that. And then, of course, there's the opposition also says that they're not mature enough to vote and stuff, and they can believe misinformation. I think, I have seen some of the stuff that older people on Facebook believe in their comments and stuff, and I just want to say I think it's the other way around, really. So, yeah, that's just my take on that.
Yeah, good to hear from you in Kamloops. Thanks so much for the call, Cash. Let's just go through some more of these callers here waiting to comment on the line. Gurleen is also at Timanawis Secondary. Hi, Gurleen. Thanks for joining us.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I do want to first acknowledge that the right to vote is certainly a pillar of democracy that is indispensable to a free nation, and it should be upheld by citizens. The question here is whether that is a responsibility that should be bestowed upon young individuals. And though I do believe it's paramount to increase youth receptivity to politics, I will also strongly disagree because, and I'll cite my own experiences as a high school student. From what I have gathered via interactions and such, students, particularly high school students, are very impressionable in that they have a proclivity to succumb to views or the prevailing views, whether it's a view that's propagated by a peer, a parent, or even a political figure. And so my concern here is that though the purported goal of this measure is to increase youth engagement in the public hemisphere, it can very easily be politicized. We've seen this. There's been a big shift in the political climate where, and this is certainly true, not just in this epoch, but political parties from across the spectrum are constantly vying for the support for the
Gurleen, can I just ask you then, because we've heard
individuals.
Yeah,
and so,
Gurleen, can I just ask you a follow-up question, because we've heard the argument now, though, that from our previous caller saying when it comes to being impressionable, being succumbing to misinformation, that adults are also vulnerable in that way to misinformation. So what do you say to that argument? Gurleen, are you there?
Hello. Sorry.
Yes, you're back now. Thank you, Gurleen. I don't know if you heard my question there, but what do you say to the argument that when it comes to being impressionable and succumbing to misinformation, that can certainly happen at any age group?
Yes, but I believe because of, again, experience, it's easier for adults having been exposed to matters that are perhaps, pertaining to politics, that they're more cognizant of such matters and are better able to respond to it.
Okay. Gurleen, thank you very much for taking time out of your day. I think you're on your lunch break right now at Tamanawis, so thanks very much for calling in. Some TikTok comments now. Thanks so much for all of your comments if you're watching us on TikTok. Notwithstanding Rob, thanks for joining us again. He writes, it's a good idea. You could force 16-year-olds to read the candidates' platforms. Andrew writes, there's very little belief that their votes would not be influenced by their parents. And Jeffo101 writes, if they can pay taxes and get a job, they can vote. Enough is enough. Okay, on that debate there, I think is what he's referring to. Thank you for your comments. Let's take one more call before I go back to my guests here. And Andrew is on the line in Victoria. Hi, Andrew. Your thoughts on lowering the voting age to 16?
Good afternoon, Michelle and your guests. My thoughts are that I agree with something that everything your callers have mentioned, which is that, yes, 16-year-olds are highly competent and adults are sometimes no more competent. Personally, I believe that we have a responsibility to vote, not a right to vote. And I'd like to see the voting age actually increased or become more difficult to vote because I don't see people voting. Maybe we need to bring in Australia's rules where if you don't vote, you actually get a ticket or a fine.
The idea of mandatory
maybe
voting.
It needs to be more like a driver's license where we make people write a knowledge test before they get behind the wheel of a vehicle. Maybe you need to earn the right to vote by completing some sort of mini course or test or online proof that you actually understand what you're doing. Because personally, as an adult, as a 40-year-old in Victoria, BC, some of my peers don't really know what they're doing, assuming they actually make it to the ballot booth. They're just like one of your previous TikTok comments said, they're voting the same flavor that their parents voted because that's how they were raised. So I would like to actually see people embrace the responsibility. We can't make them appreciate it, but maybe we can change the rules to make people realize the wonderful thing about living in a democracy is that you do have choice.
The weight of it.
It's a right to be protected.
Andrew, really good to hear from you in Victoria as well. Some more TikTok comments here. Ken's writes, many older adults fall for disinformation or misinformation and AI and lack understanding of our politics. Sori writes, there are poorly equipped decision makers in every age group. We need more people voting, get them in early, and build that habit. Thank you for your comments. And let me go back to my guests, Jerry and Jason Song, who are co-directors of Vote16 B.C. Okay, we are hearing arguments on both sides here, but I want to ask you, maybe I'll go to you, Jerry. What would be different? Yes, there's greater engagement, but how would politics look different if the voting age was lowered to 16?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a really great question. I think to begin, there will be structural changes just in the way that politics approaches. I think right now it's very safe to say that youth have often been sidelined by the current structure of government. So after speaking with many politicians on our podcast, it's safe to say that all the politicians and the vast majority of politicians do actually care about youth. They want youth to be improved. However, there's just a systematic reason as to why they cannot sustain and apply vast amounts of time to cater towards youth, just because it's an opportunity cost. If youth are not in the electorate, every single minute, every single hour they spend on youth issues is time not spending on more reliable or voters that can actually vote. And if a politician is constantly spending time on youth and their opponent is constantly spending time on actual voters, then when it comes to decision day, that person who constantly spends time on youth will sadly lose. Now we shift the structure. Now politicians have to actively care about youth. Youth become a voter. Their voices have to be heard.
Let's, a lot of people want to comment on this. Anne in Armstrong, go ahead. Thanks for calling in.
Hello.
Hi, you have pardon me, you wanted to talk about if young people can drive, and so why not vote? Is that right?
I just wanted to point out something like an individual. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
It's an individual thing. If you're driving, an individual mistake, it's your mistake. But in voting, it's a group effort. It's one person cannot affect hugely the rest of the vote. I mean, we all have to do our part, and it's like the last caller said, it's our responsibility. And I would kind of agree with him that any voter should have to take knowledge of the system. But that was my main point. It's just like, you know, some things kind of directly affect outcomes, and others are more a collective issue, like voting.
And thank you very much for the call. Squeeze in Danielle in Vancouver. You have a teenager right now.
Hi there. Yes, I have a 15-year-old, and he actually participated in the federal election within his high school this year. They did an election.
Right.
And he's quite progressive in his thinking, because this is what we practice in our home. But the majority of turnout voted for the CPC, the Conservative Party, and he stated it was because and it was a big male turnout. They were really motivated by the racially divided rhetoric that the party has. And so I think because of that age, it's an age that their fully frontal lobe hasn't formed yet. They're still swayed by angry and divisive comments. I still think they need a lot of education when it comes to voting, and to see the background, how everyone's lives are affected by different policies.
Danielle, thank you very much for the call. Glad we got you in before the end of the show. Ken's writes, this could be an incredible driver for investment in education. Civics is wildly overlooked. Jerry and Jason, you've started a conversation, and you've been having it, but certainly it's one that garners interest. Thanks so much for your time, both of you.
Thank you so much for having us on.
I'll be listening to your podcast. Jerry Song and Jason Song, brothers, co-hosts of a podcast called Twin Talk Politics and co-directors of Vote16 BC. You can continue to let us know. Give us your vote at BC Today at cbc.ca.